the Neanderthals. In fact, some people believe that red hair may actually be a trace of Neanderthal genome that we see today.
Our closest extinct human relatives vanished from the fossil record about 40,000 years ago, leaving behind more questions than answers. Neanderthals lived alongside our ancestors for thousands of years, shared our world, and even shared our beds. Yet despite decades of research and thousands of archaeological discoveries, these ancient humans remain deeply puzzling.
It focuses on a close-knit community of cave dwellers in Siberia who lived 54,000 years ago.
The more we learn about them, the more mysterious they become. Here are 15 enduring mysteries that scientists still can't fully explain.
That they wouldn't have subtle sounds. It would be loud, or very, very loud. And we can try and get that by, I'm now going to engage Elliot by push into me. This is actually getting him right into his body. Now speak.
1, 2, 3.
Now let's make a sound. Just let's make a huge R.
Ah!
And again.
The sudden disappearance. Around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals simply ceased to exist. After surviving for over 300,000 years through multiple ice ages and dramatic climate shifts, they disappeared within just a few thousand years of modern humans arriving in Europe. The speed of this extinction is baffling. Some researchers blame climate change, pointing to a period of rapid cooling that might have devastated their food sources. Others suggest disease brought by modern humans wiped them out, similar to how European diseases later decimated Native American populations. Competition for resources seems like an obvious answer, but Neanderthals were perfectly adapted to European environments and had survived far worse conditions before. There's also evidence they weren't simply killed off in warfare because violent conflict between the two species appears rare in the archaeological record. Perhaps most puzzling is that some Neanderthal populations vanished even before modern humans reached their territories. The Gibraltar Neanderthals, for instance, held on until roughly 32,000 years ago in complete isolation. Why did some groups persist while others collapsed? No single explanation accounts for all the evidence, leaving their extinction one of prehistory's greatest unsolved mysteries. The interbreeding paradox. If you have European or Asian ancestry, roughly 2% of your DNA comes from Neanderthals. This proves our ancestors didn't just meet Neanderthals, but had children with them repeatedly over thousands of years. Here's what doesn't make sense, though. The genetic evidence shows interbreeding happened, yet we find very little archaeological evidence of these two species living together. Were these encounters rare and isolated? Or were mixed communities more common than the fossil record suggests? Even stranger, some Neanderthal genes that entered the human genome have been incredibly beneficial. Certain immune system genes inherited from Neanderthals help us fight diseases today, and some genes affecting skin and hair were clearly advantageous for humans moving into new climates. But other Neanderthal DNA segments have been almost completely eliminated from modern human populations, suggesting they reduced fertility or survival. Scientists found that Neanderthal genes are strangely absent from the X chromosome, and genes related to testes function in modern humans. This pattern hints that male hybrid offspring might have been less fertile, but why? If the two species could produce healthy children together, why did Neanderthals disappear while their genes survived in us? The paradox deepens when you consider that Neanderthals also carried some modern human DNA, suggesting the gene flow went both directions. Their sophisticated burial practices. Neanderthals buried their dead deliberately, and this behavior raises profound questions about their inner lives. At sites like La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, archaeologists found Neanderthal skeletons in carefully dug graves, positioned in specific ways that couldn't have happened naturally. Some burials included what appear to be grave goods, though this remains hotly debated. A child's burial at Roc de Marsalle showed the body had been protected from scavengers, suggesting someone cared enough to ensure proper treatment. But why did they do this? Burial behavior implies awareness of death as a concept, possibly even beliefs about an afterlife. It suggests emotional bonds and perhaps grief. Yet we can't be certain whether Neanderthal burials were spiritual rituals or simply practical disposal of bodies for hygiene reasons. Modern humans eventually developed elaborate burial customs with clear symbolic elements, but Neanderthal burials remain ambiguous. Did they mourn their dead? Did they believe in something beyond death? The evidence tantalizes us with possibilities, but provides no definitive answers. Some researchers argue that many suspected Neanderthal burials are actually natural deaths where sediment accidentally covered bodies, making the entire question even more uncertain. The mystery of their brain size. Neanderthal brains were actually larger than modern human brains on average. Their cranial capacity often exceeded 1,300 cubic centimeters, while ours averages around 1,400. So why did we survive and they didn't? Brain size alone clearly doesn't determine intelligence or evolutionary success. Some researchers suggest that Neanderthal brains were structured differently, with more neural tissue dedicated to vision and body control, leaving less for social cognition and complex planning. Their eyes were indeed larger than ours, possibly an adaptation to the lower light levels in Ice Age Europe. But did this trade-off really matter enough to cause their extinction? Other scientists argue we're asking the wrong question entirely. Maybe Neanderthal brains were just as capable as ours, but their smaller population size meant fewer innovations and less cultural exchange. Or perhaps their cognitive abilities were different rather than inferior, specialized for their lifestyle in ways we haven't yet recognized. The fossil evidence shows their brains grew and developed differently than ours during childhood, but what this meant for their actual thinking remains mysterious. Large brains are also metabolically expensive, requiring tremendous amounts of energy. Maybe Neanderthals struggled to feed their big brains during resource shortages in ways that modern humans somehow avoided. Neanderthal speech capabilities. Could Neanderthals talk? This question has sparked fierce debates for decades. The physical evidence is contradictory. Neanderthals possessed the FOXP2 gene, a genetic variant associated with speech and language in modern humans. They also had a hyoid bone, a small bone in the throat that supports the tongue and is crucial for the complex sounds required for speech. Computer simulations of their vocal tracts suggest they could have produced a wide range of sounds.
That they wouldn't have subtle sounds. It would be loud, or very, very loud. And we can try and get that by, I'm now going to engage Elliot by push into me, and this is actually getting him right into his body. Now speak.
1, 2, 3.
Now let's make a sound. Just let's make a huge R.
Ah!
And again.
However, their ear anatomy was slightly different from ours, possibly tuned to different frequency ranges. Some researchers argue this indicates they communicated differently, perhaps using sounds we would find unusual. The structure of their thorax suggests they might have had less precise breath control than we do, which could have limited their speech capabilities. But here's the real puzzle. Even if Neanderthals could physically produce speech sounds, did they have language in the way we understand it? Language requires not just making noises, but having complex grammar, symbolic thinking, and abstract concepts. Without a time machine, we can't know if Neanderthals told stories, shared complex ideas, or simply used basic vocalizations and gestures. The archaeological evidence of their behavior suggests they could plan and coordinate, which might require some form of communication beyond simple grunts, but we're essentially guessing. The purpose of their cave art. For years, scientists believed that symbolic art was uniquely human, appearing only after modern humans evolved. Then researchers began finding cave paintings in Spain that dated to over 64,000 years ago, before modern humans even reached Europe. Neanderthals made them. At sites like Maltravieso Cave, Neanderthals created red ochre paintings including hand stencils, dots, and geometric patterns. In other locations, they collected unusual shells and eagle talons, apparently for decorative purposes. This discovery revolutionized our understanding of Neanderthal cognition because creating symbolic art requires abstract thinking and the ability to represent ideas visually. But here's what we don't understand. What did these symbols mean to them? Were they religious, territorial markers, or simply decoration? The images are far simpler than the elaborate animal paintings modern humans later created in places like Lascaux. Did Neanderthals lack the imagination for complex imagery, or did their art serve different purposes? Some researchers suggest the dating methods might be wrong and that modern humans actually created these paintings earlier than we thought. Others argue that Neanderthals only started creating art after encountering modern humans and copying the behavior. The truth remains elusive, hidden in the ochre stains on ancient cave walls. Their limited population growth, Neanderthal population numbers remain strangely low throughout their entire existence. Genetic estimates suggest there were never more than about 70,000 Neanderthals alive at any one time, and often far fewer. For comparison, modern human populations exploded relatively quickly. Why couldn't Neanderthals increase their numbers? Some theories point to their biology. Neanderthal women might have had longer gestation periods or longer intervals between births than modern human women, naturally limiting population growth. Their high calorie requirements, due to stocky muscular bodies, might have meant the environment simply couldn't support more of them. But these explanations feel incomplete. Neanderthals lived across a vast range from Europe to Central Asia with diverse environments and resources. Surely some populations should have thrived and expanded? Instead, genetic evidence shows Neanderthals suffered repeated population bottlenecks, crashes where their numbers dropped dramatically. Were they simply unlucky, repeatedly hammered by climate disasters? Or was there something about their social structure or behavior that prevented population expansion? Some researchers suggest they lived in very small, isolated groups that rarely mixed, leading to inbreeding problems that weakened the species over time. The archaeological evidence of their campsites does tend to be small, suggesting group sizes of maybe 10 to 15 individuals. But why they couldn't form larger communities remains unexplained. The cannibalism evidence. Multiple Neanderthal sites show clear evidence of cannibalism, and it's genuinely disturbing. At Moulin-Guercy in France, researchers found Neanderthal bones that had been deliberately broken open to extract marrow, with cut marks indicating the flesh had been carefully removed. Similar evidence appears at sites in Spain and Belgium. The bones were processed in exactly the same way as animal bones from the same sites, suggesting Neanderthals sometimes treated other Neanderthals as food. But why? Survival cannibalism during desperate times is one possibility. If a group faced starvation, consuming the dead might have been a last resort. However, some of these sites show no evidence of food shortages, with abundant animal bones indicating successful hunting. This raises darker possibilities. Was it ritual cannibalism, perhaps related to burial practices or beliefs about death? Or was it violence between groups, with victors consuming their enemies? Some researchers suggest that cannibalism might have been medicinal, with Neanderthals consuming the dead to cure illness or gain strength, a practice documented in some modern human societies. The problem is, we have no way to determine the context. Were they eating family members who died naturally, consuming enemy warriors, or something else entirely? The bones can tell us that cannibalism happened, but not why, leaving this as one of the more unsettling Neanderthal mysteries. Neanderthal jewelry and ornaments. Neanderthals collected and wore jewelry, but we don't know why. Archaeological sites have yielded eagle talons with cut marks and wear patterns suggesting they were strung together as necklaces. They collected shells from beaches up to 200 kilometers away, apparently valuing them enough to transport them great distances. Some shells show evidence of being strung or attached to clothing. Neanderthals also used red and yellow ochre pigments, possibly for body painting, though some researchers argue they used ochre for practical purposes like hide tanning. The discovery of personal ornaments suggests Neanderthals had a sense of aesthetics and possibly individual identity. Maybe jewelry indicated status within groups or served as markers of group membership. But here's the puzzle. The evidence for Neanderthal ornaments is sparse compared to modern humans, who went absolutely wild with beads, pendants, and decorated tools. Did Neanderthals value personal adornment less, or are we simply missing most of their ornaments in the archaeological record? Some researchers believe Neanderthals only started making jewelry after meeting modern humans and copying the behavior, but the earliest ornaments predate the modern human arrival in some regions. The sporadic nature of the finds makes it hard to determine if jewelry was a long-standing tradition or a brief experimental phase in certain populations. Without understanding their motivations, these simple objects remain frustratingly mysterious. Their fire-making techniques. Neanderthals definitely used fire and used it well. Sites across Europe show hearths, burned bones, and heat-altered stones, proving they maintained fires for cooking, warmth, and probably light. But here's what puzzles researchers. We've never found direct evidence of how Neanderthals started fires. No fire-starting kits have been definitively identified at Neanderthal sites. Modern humans created fires by striking pyrite against flint to create sparks, or using friction-based methods with wooden drills. Neanderthals presumably used similar techniques, but we don't have the archaeological proof. Some researchers suggest they might have primarily maintained fires rather than creating them, keeping embers alive and transporting them between camps. This seems unlikely given their mobility in the climate, as keeping fire alive continuously would have been extremely difficult. The chemistry of their hearths shows they selected specific types of wood and managed their fires skillfully, demonstrating sophisticated pyrotechnology. They even heated birch bark tar to create adhesive for hafting stone tools to wooden handles, a process requiring precise temperature control. So they clearly understood fire deeply. Why then can't we find their fire-starting tools? Perhaps they used organic materials that simply didn't survive. Or maybe we haven't recognized the tools when we found them. The absence of evidence creates a strange gap in our understanding of a fundamental Neanderthal skill. The lack of innovation. Neanderthals made stone tools for over 200,000 years, and their toolkit barely changed. They primarily used the Mysterian technique, creating flakes and points that were effective but relatively simple. While modern humans rapidly innovated with new tool types, specialized implements, and eventually sophisticated weapons like atlatls and bows, Neanderthals stuck with the same basic designs generation after generation. Why? Some researchers argue this shows limited cognitive flexibility or creativity. If Neanderthals couldn't innovate, maybe they lacked some crucial aspect of intelligence that modern humans possessed. But this explanation seems too simple. Neanderthals did occasionally create more advanced tools, and in some regions, they developed sophisticated implements near the end of their existence. Perhaps they simply didn't need to innovate. If your tools effectively kill game, process hides, and work wood, why change them? Conservative tool traditions might reflect practical success rather than cognitive limitations. Another possibility is that Neanderthal population size and social structure limited innovation. Smaller, more isolated groups have fewer chances for individuals to experiment and for successful innovations to spread. Modern humans had larger social networks that facilitated the exchange of ideas and techniques. Still, 200,000 years is an incredibly long time to maintain essentially unchanged technology. Even accounting for practical effectiveness in small populations, the technological stasis remains puzzling and suggests something fundamental about how Neanderthals learned and transmitted knowledge across generations. Their treatment of the injured and disabled. Multiple Neanderthal skeletons show evidence of serious injuries that healed, suggesting the individuals survived for years after being severely disabled. One famous example from Shanidar Cave in Iraq shows a Neanderthal who had a withered arm, possibly from a childhood injury, and vision problems. He survived to around 40 years old, which was elderly for Neanderthals. This individual couldn't have contributed much to hunting or other physically demanding tasks, yet his group kept him alive. Similar cases appear across the Neanderthal range. Individuals with healed fractures, degenerative diseases, and severe injuries who clearly received care from others. This evidence suggests compassion and social bonds. Caring for disabled group members requires empathy and a sense of community that we typically associate with complex social structures. But here's the mystery. Why would Neanderthals, living in small groups where every member's contribution mattered for survival, support individuals who couldn't pull their weight? Some researchers argue that even disabled individuals could have contributed in non-physical ways, perhaps through knowledge, toolmaking, or childcare. Others suggest that strong social bonds made it unthinkable to abandon injured group members, even at cost to the group. The care of the disabled might indicate Neanderthals had strong emotional connections and moral codes, or perhaps family groups were so small that every individual represented irreplaceable genetic value. Whatever the reason, these ancient cases of compassion challenge the brutish caveman stereotype and raise questions about Neanderthal society that we're only beginning to explore. The Shanidar flower burial mystery. In 1960, archaeologist Ralph Selecki discovered something extraordinary at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal burial that appeared to contain flower pollen. The concentration of pollen around the skeleton suggested someone had placed flowers on the grave, an act of emotion and ritual that would fundamentally challenge how we viewed Neanderthals. Selecki's interpretation painted Neanderthals as sensitive, spiritual beings who honored their dead with flowers. The discovery became famous, influencing public perception and scientific debate for decades. But there's a problem. Many researchers now believe the pollen got there naturally. Rodents commonly bring flowering plants into caves, and pollen can be transported by wind and water. The concentration of pollen might have been coincidental rather than intentional. Some scientists have conducted new analyses suggesting the pollen does show patterns consistent with deliberate placement, but the debate rages on. We may never know for certain whether those flowers were a Neanderthal's final tribute or simply the work of ancient rodents. The Shanidar flower burial has become a symbol of the larger challenge in interpreting Neanderthal behavior. How do we distinguish intentional acts from natural processes in sites tens of thousands of years old? The romance of the flower burial appeals to our desire to see Neanderthals as fundamentally human, but the uncertain evidence reminds us how much we're projecting onto fragmentary remains. Neanderthal-made structures. In 1990, cavers exploring the Bruniquel cave in southern France, deep underground, found something that shouldn't exist: circular structures built from broken stalagmites. These weren't natural formations, but deliberate constructions, with stalagmites broken to similar lengths and arranged in ring patterns. Dating techniques eventually proved these structures were about 176,000 years old, made by Neanderthals. But why would Neanderthals venture 336 meters into a pitch-black cave system and spend time breaking off stalagmites to build rings? The structures show evidence of fire, with burned bones and blackened stalagmites, so they used flames for light while working. Some researchers suggest the structures might have been symbolic or ritual spaces, perhaps related to ceremonies or initiation rites. Others propose more practical purposes, like storage areas or shelters, though building shelters deep underground makes little practical sense. The sheer effort required to create these structures and the choice to place them so far from daylight suggests they held special significance. Were they sacred spaces? Meeting points. The location in absolute darkness, requiring fire to access, certainly suggests something beyond everyday activity. Similar mysterious structures might exist in other caves, overlooked or misinterpreted by earlier archaeologists who didn't expect Neanderthals to build anything. The Bruniquel structures force us to reconsider what Neanderthals were capable of and what mattered to them, but the purpose remains frustratingly unclear. Their possible seafaring abilities. Tools made by Neanderthals have been found on Mediterranean islands that were never connected to the mainland, even during the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age. Sites on islands like Crete have yielded stone tools that appear to be at least 130,000 years old, suggesting someone was island hopping long before modern humans were supposed to have developed seafaring technology. If Neanderthals made these tools, they must have crossed open water, requiring boats or rafts. But we have no direct evidence of Neanderthal watercraft, and many researchers doubt they had the cognitive abilities to develop maritime technology. Some argue the tools might have been made by earlier human species, or that the dating is wrong. Others suggest the islands might have been accessible via land bridges that we haven't yet identified. However, the distances involved at some sites make accidental crossings on debris extremely unlikely. If Neanderthals did cross these waters intentionally, it would indicate planning, boat-building skills, and perhaps knowledge passed down through generations about what lay across the sea. Such capabilities would require levels of abstract thinking and technology transmission that push against traditional views of Neanderthal abilities. The alternative is that earlier humans, possibly Homo heidelbergensis, reached these islands and were misattributing the tools. Until we find an actual Neanderthal skeleton on these islands or direct evidence of boats, this mystery remains wide open to interpretation. The Neanderthals vanished, but they haunt us still in our genes and in the questions they left behind. Every discovery about them seems to raise new puzzles, challenging our assumptions about intelligence, culture, and what it means to be human. Perhaps that's what makes them so fascinating. They were like us, but also different in ways we're still struggling to understand.